Assalamu alaikum, everyone. All right, so welcome to the Navigating Through Politics of Fear workshop. Today we have Sh.Musleh Khan and Sh.Navaid Aziz who will be facilitating this discussion today, inshallah. Before we begin, I would like to introduce myself, the moderator. My name is Ifrah Yusuf. I'm an accounting student at the University of Ottawa, about to enter my third year, inshallah. During my past 2 years at the university, I have been an active member of the University of Ottawa Muslim Student Association, as well as the University of Ottawa Somali Student Association. When I'm not in my books or at work, I like to spend time volunteering with initiatives such as the Justice for Abdurrahman Coalition, an advocacy group fighting for the justice of our late brother Abdurrahman Abdi. May Allah be pleased with him and have mercy on his soul, who passed away last year in police brutality. As well as the Somali Aid Campaign, a group of university students who are raising money towards the drought in Somalia. As I said before, we will have Sh.Musleh Khan and Sh.Navaid Aziz answering our questions today, inshallah. So Musleh Khan is a husband, father, teacher, and renowned speaker who resides in Toronto, Ontario. In 2002, he commenced the start of his education at the University of Medina, where he completed his studies in Islamic theology in 2010. Musleh now develops and instructs classes, spends time with youth, and is a guidance counselor with a natural knack for helping individuals overcome their life struggles. Musleh also believes in creating a positive impact in his community and currently serves as the chaplain of the Toronto Police Service 32 Division and also a member of the TPS Muslim Consultative Committee. Musleh's biggest pet peeve is anything unorganized. So when he is alphabetizing his bookshelf, he can be found spending time with his children and family, playing basketball, long-distance running, and delving into a good book.
Ifrah, can I introduce myself?
Oh, perfect. Yes, you can.
So my name is Sh.Navaid Aziz. I was born and raised in Montreal. I graduated in Commerce and Social Sciences, went on to pursue a degree in Arabic and Islamic law. I moved to Calgary as an imam originally, and then I transitioned into doing public relations and spokesmanship for the Muslim community. And that's what I've been doing for the past 4 years or so. Along with that, I do chaplaincy with the Calgary Police Service, and I regularly consult on anything and everything related to Islam. My vested interest in this discussion for today is basically envisioning what the next 150 years of Canada is going to look like. And that is why, alhamdulillah, I'm glad to be a part of this panel. So I'm going to let Ifrah introduce it, inshallah, and we can begin.
Perfect. Jazakallah khair. So the objective of this workshop is to discuss how certain political ideologies incite fear and how we can manage this. Over the past few years, there has been a steady rise in the instability of politics around the world. You side with a certain idea and suddenly you are tagged with a stereotype. How can one navigate through politics without the idea of fear-mongering onto them?
Excellent. So I'll start off, inshallah. So when you look at our history as Canadians, and we're just going to compare the last two administrations, the current administration that we have right now with Justin Trudeau and the previous administration with Stephen Harper. And if you look at these two administrations, their agendas were very, very different. And if you focus just on the issue of inclusion itself, the Trudeau administration, very inclusive, very multicultural, very diverse. And his main slogan is, our unity, our strength is our diversity. And that is what he's running with. And you can see his popularity not only in Canada, but across the world as well. The previous administration, their main focus was right-wing propaganda. Basically, what we mean by that is that as long as we protect the vested interests of the elite, then we'll find a way to make the country run. Now, clearly, it works well from time to time, and at other times it didn't work. When you look at his last strategy in terms of making the niqab a headline issue, that clearly backfired against the Conservative Party. Now, what we want to look at is, number one, the impact of such tactics, and number two, how do we counter that? So the impact of such tactics, in the short run, it led to him losing the election. But what impact did that have on us as a community? Well, it was one of marginalization and one of stigmatization. That even if you're wearing a hijab, all of a sudden, sisters are being accused of being oppressed and being, told that, hey, you're in Canada, you don't have to wear that if you don't want to. And this sort of rhetoric becomes very common and standard. Now, if you compare that to what the current administration is doing, you'll notice that it's something completely different. That be who you are, as you are, embrace and accept everyone. So now, as a Muslim community, in this current administration, what can we do to prepare better if another Harper administration or someone like Harper was to come into power? Now you may be thinking, hey, that might not happen. Well, the reality is, if you understand the world of politics, it always happens. There's always a shift from the left wing to the right wing and the right wing to the left wing. That's what happens all the time. We saw it, Barack Obama, Trump comes into power. We saw it here, Harper leaves and Trudeau comes in. That's the reality of it. So now if you were to prepare for the worst case scenario and you expect another administration based upon right-wing propaganda, what can we do as a Muslim community to counter that before it happens? That's where we want to hear from you. What are some of the ideas that you have? What are some of the questions you have? And inshallah, we can discuss those things.
Perfect. Okay. So does anyone have any questions right now? We have some sticky notes. We'll be having our volunteer pass it around. And we have some pens if you want to write it down. But does anyone have any questions that they want to say, maybe on a mic? Anyone? Okay, no problem. We'll pass around the sticky notes if you do have any questions in the meantime. I have some questions for myself. Anyone can take this, but how can one be active in politics and follow what Islam says? Are there guidelines for me?
You want to start, and then I'll something after.
Yeah, I've been starting the whole time. Being engaged in politics. So this is obviously very, very, very polarized, right? You have a fraction of the Muslim community that says Muslims shouldn't be involved in the political process at all. And then you have a fraction of the community that has pretty much defined Islam through political activism. And as is typical, the balance is somewhere in between. Now, I'll tell you the general guidelines that yes, Muslims should be involved in politics and they should play an active role in politics. But what should not happen is our religious spaces should not be taken over for political use. And what I mean by that is, I'm not sure what it's like in Ottawa, but I know in Calgary, like we have one Eid, 20, 30,000 people show up, but that becomes like a front for PR for the government. So the mayor comes and gives like 10 minutes, all the MLAs come and give 10 minutes, and then other representatives come and give 10 minutes. And by the end, people have heard like 50 speeches and they haven't even prayed Salatul Eid yet. Then they pray Salatul Eid, then the khutbah is given, then more pictures are taken. And for me, we've lost the sanctity of our faith. So that even on Friday, when election time comes around, before the khutbah or after the khutbah, you'll get a political representative to come and address the community. I'm completely for political representatives addressing the community and rallying support from the community. What I'm against is them using sacred spaces and abusing that space. That, hey, when it's political season, let us milk the Muslim community. But outside of the political season, you don't see these parties. So I think it's about developing two things. Number one, our own people in politics that understand the guidelines and sanctity of our faith and religion. And number two, investing in those relationships with individuals that may be from the non-Muslim community that have genuine concern about the Muslim community. And what does genuine concern look like? Well, they're willing to interact with the Muslim community outside of them rallying political clout. So that would be like a small introduction to that. Now in terms of what are the guidelines, I think as long as one understands the general guidelines of Islam, the same things apply. Just, I would say, again, make sure we don't lose the sanctity of our religious spaces.
There's just really one point that I want to also add to what Sheikh mentioned, and that is try to tread softly when you get into this political world. So volunteer when you see an opportunity in your community to volunteer for whatever political party might be holding community events, and get a taste for what that lifestyle is and what those community events represent. Get a taste of the audience and the atmosphere, because the fact is that many Muslims just simply don't know what to expect, and it's very easy for them to be lured into areas where they themselves are uncertain of. They've never studied, they're doubtful, they've just heard things and read things about how we should deal with certain situations. So what I would encourage all of us at some point is to actually go out to a few community events. Take a couple of your friends or some of your family relatives or anybody and just see for yourself what the atmosphere is like. What that will do is that would first and foremost give you an illustration of what this looks like, and it'll also help you to ask the right questions. It'll also help you and steer your education about the political world in the right direction, because as all of you know, once you delve into politics, there's 1,000,001 different ways you can study this. It can get very controversial. It can hamper into your deen and your religion. It could hamper into your family life. It could affect so many different things if you simply aren't experienced or don't have an idea of what you're getting into. So that's what I would encourage as well, inshaAllah ta'ala.
Jazakallah khair for those answers. I believe we have anyone. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay. Well, I became the Toronto Police Chaplain in November of last year. That's all I'm going to say about that. If you know the story, then you know the story. If not, what I will say to you is this. This backlash and people smearing your reputation or your religion or your image or you, listening to criticism and going through all of that heat, if you want to call it that, it's part of the process. And you as an individual have to learn and understand for yourself how well you are able to cope with, I would want to say take on the criticism, but at least figure out how you can productively and intellectually respond to such criticism. You have to be very cautious with words. You have to be very cautious that when somebody is not taking you seriously and trying to smear whatever image you have or whatever message you're trying to give, that you're spreading Sharia law, you want to take over the government, you want to do this, you want to do that. Respond to that stuff. How you respond is going to be dependent on your experience, your knowledge, and your surroundings, and your support, and so on and so forth. But the fact is what I'm saying to you is, where you see an opportunity to respond, and where you see an opportunity to defend your religion and speak up for the morals and ethics that you all know are correct about our deen, do so. Have your voice heard. In the light of all of this hatred and criticism, remember, this is not something new to us. Everybody understand that, right? Any Islamic history story of any nation, of any prophet, of any messenger, this was the same rhetoric, this was the same theme that happened to many of them. It could be worse in some ways, it could be better in other ways. So just keep that in mind. Discipline your heart and your mind that you're going to be faced with people. You're going to be faced with this kind of criticism, and you're going to have to build yourself, strengthening yourself through education, through reliance in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, many things. Like, your question is a profound one. And for each of us, we all have an answer to this question. We all have different ways that we can cope with it. But at least generally speaking, so two things: make sure that you're educated, and secondly, have the courage, be proud of your identity, respond where you can respond, but do so in an intellectual manner, in a civilized manner, in a peaceful manner as much as possible, inshallah.
One thing that I picked up from your question was that you had said that we're not taken seriously. Can you expand on that? What do you mean by that? Right. No, I understand what you're saying, and I wanted to understand that part better in order to explain what I'm trying to say. From a politician's perspective, he's looking for two things: either political support or financial support. Financial support looks like you're actually funding their campaign or you're helping them fundraise for their campaign. Political support looks like how many people from a particular community actually come and vote for that individual. Now, recently in Canada, within the Muslim community, we've started this concept of Muslim voting, where you are advised that, hey, there's a particular member in your community that's running. He seems to be pro-Muslim. He's engaged with the Muslim community. He is a better candidate than the other candidate. And this is strategic voting, which is very, very important. And I think the more actively we engage in strategic voting and voting for those individuals that are in favor of the Muslim community and do stand with the Muslim community in times of tragedy, the more likely we will have representation. That is if we don't create our own representation. So I still think in the long run we do need to create our own representation, but for the time being, using strategic voting for those candidates that represent our values and represent the Muslim community is a good step forward. Number two is that you'll notice that one of the key strengths of the Muslim community is that we're amazing at fundraising. Today's conference has a fundraiser in it. You come to Ramadan, the masjid in Ramadan, there's fundraising. You're at Eid Salah, there's fundraising, constant fundraising. That shows us we're good at fundraising. But what ends up happening is we're always fundraising for the same project. Charities are fundraising for orphans, masajid are fundraising for the masajid. But the interests of the community are much, much greater than that, right? Again, lobbying on behalf of the Muslim community, who's doing that? So I think there also needs to be a political fund for Muslims, that we will actively fund those candidates that will represent us. If you look at a very, very small example of this institution or organization called AIPAC. AIPAC is the American-Israeli relationship. They're a very small group of people, and they just put a lot of money and investment into politics. You're looking at a budget of every single year of like $1 billion. Now, what does that look like? That means that anyone that is running in the presidential race has to come and speak at their annual convention. If they do not speak at their annual convention, they're not getting nominated. My favorite candidate in the American election was Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders made a conscious decision not to show up to that conference. What ends up happening? He doesn't get chosen for the Democratic Party, and thus you have Hillary running against Trump. In my personal opinion, that was the worst election that's taken place in the history of the United States. Why? Trump is threatening to exile all Muslims from America and not let them in. And if you're voting for Hillary, you're like, yeah, she's a better candidate. Well, no, she's not, because if you look at the previous administration, that same administration from the Democratic side bombed the heck out of our countries. We have never seen drone drops into our country like we did with the previous administration, and she was just going to continue that. So Muslims had to actively choose between our brothers and sisters being killed overseas or Muslims getting exiled from the land that they live in. Those were their two choices. Now what that teaches us, again, up and until we're willing to politically fund candidates, at the end of the day, we have no one to blame but ourselves. So this is part of the discussion that needs to take place. So what I would emphasize, in order to be taken seriously, either we need to bring the votes to the table or we need to bring the money to the table. If we're not doing that, then we have no one to blame but ourselves. Allahu Alam.
Jazakallah khair. Do you need a mic? Okay.
Yes. Of course. Of course. Excellent. Very good. So this ties into the first part of my discussion where I was saying that we need to create our own political institutions and have our own representation. But until we start creating our own candidates that are well grounded in our ethics and in the political system, that's when you either need to bring the votes or you need to fund someone. So I genuinely believe that a long-term solution is creating our own candidates. For the time being, that's not possible. But the scary reality is I feel that even if we brought our own candidates, they would not get the votes just because of this topic of inclusion. That as a Muslim community, can we be fully inclusive? And that's where, I'm not sure if you attended my session or not, I said if you look at inclusion, inclusion is not bringing people together to the table on something that we agree upon. Inclusion is looking at our differences and accepting those differences and working towards a common good. And that's what inclusion should look like. Now, our differences with these other minorities are, as you mentioned, a moral and ethical dilemma. But is there a common ground between us? Yes. That common ground between us is that we will both stand up against discrimination and will stand up for human rights. That the very fact that we are human, we have to defend each other's human rights. Do we have to agree with each other's morality and the ethics and the things that we do? No, we don't. So I should be allowed to vocalize that, yet still defend their right to exist. And that's the way I would like to see the political spectrum, rather than everyone compromising on their political and religious and ethical ideals just for the sake of inclusion. Because in the long term, we do ourselves and everyone else a disservice by assimilating and watering down our own faith. So I think, now to summarize my answer to your question, there is a level of onus if there are own representations from the Muslim community itself. They have to stand up for Islamic values. But if we're actively funding someone, then you choose someone that is most closely inclined. But understand that their own vested interest is to get votes and to get everyone's votes, including those of those who we might disagree with. Allahu A'lam.
Yes, brother. Do you need a mic? No. Okay.
Well, yeah. Of course. Yes. Yes. Of course. So I was talking about how my own personal identity took a drastic shift in the post 9/11 world. 9/11 happened and literally the world changed. And I'll just give you a small example of this. I got accepted into the Islamic University of Medina the year before 9/11. And that summer, when I came back, pre-9/11 world, I was wearing a kufi, I was wearing a thobe, and I walked through JFK airport like that. I went through immigration, no one batted an eyelid twice. I got into a cab where I shared that cab with a vice president from Shell and a vice president from Siemens. We had an amazing conversation till we got to Gatwick Airport. And that is what pre-9/11 was like. Post 9/11 happens the very following year. I'm at Jeddah Airport buying a New York Yankees baseball cap. I already had a New York Giants football jersey and I'm wearing Adidas track pants. And I'm praying the whole time that as soon as I arrive into JFK Airport in New York, that no one looks at me. But I get off the plane and, excuse me, sir, can you step to the side? And that's even before we get to the immigration. And that's where it all began. Taken to the side, questioned for a while. I get out to the airport to get in line to catch a taxi to Gatwick Airport to fly into Montreal. And as I'm carrying my luggage, I have a watch on my wrist. And my watch keeps hitting my suitcase as I'm rolling it. And eventually my watch falls. And I want you to think, how long does it take a watch to fall from a person's wrist to the ground? Not even a couple of seconds. It's a couple of seconds at best. Those couple of seconds as it's falling felt like minutes. Because as people saw something fall from my hand, everyone's looking at me, and there's this automatic shock and horror and awe. Is this going to blow up, and are we all going to die? And this is outside JFK Airport. And this is the difference between this time frame is 9 months later. And that's what had happened. Now, one of the things I felt at that time is that only if these people knew me better, they would understand I would never harm these people. And that was like a huge realization for me, that you never know when the next calamity is going to happen. Either a political calamity like down south right now, or a catastrophe like a terrorist attack. So what you can do is build those relationships before you need them. And I think that's where we've fallen short. That part of the Muslim community living in the West is there has to be two things. One, an open door policy for the community. Come and visit our masajid and our institutions at any time. We have nothing to hide. And number two is active outreach. That sometimes people have fear. They don't want to come to our institutions. They don't want to come to our spaces because they are genuinely afraid. So how about if we have representatives of our own community that are available in public spaces doing presentations on Islam, talking about what our faith is about, talking about the history of Islam in Canada. Well, Muslims have been here, as we realize today, since 1854. Our first terrorism case happened in 2006. What happened between 1854 and 2006 that there's no terrorism charges in Canada related to Muslims? But in the post-2006 world, all of a sudden we have a whole bunch of them. Well, clearly something happened around 2006 that catalyzed this. That's what we want to talk about. So Islam as a whole is a very peaceful religion. But yes, we have some bad apples in the Muslim community, and we will own that. But to say that it is a Muslim community problem as opposed to a societal problem, then this is a disservice. Because world politics play a huge role into this. So, the social services that we provide to our communities play a huge role in this. Police brutality play a huge role in this. Marginalization, stigmatization play a huge role in this. So I hope that sort of answers your question, inshallah.
Are there any other questions that people would like to ask on out loud? Or, okay, I'll grab the volunteer to grab the piece of paper, but I'll go into the sticky notes that I grabbed
Sorry,
from...
she had her hand up. Should I ask?
Oh, do you want to ask out loud? I saw a sticky note. I thought you wrote it down already. Okay, if you would like to... Do you need a mic?
Yes. Of course. Excellent. So one of the things that I was mentioning is that up until we have our own political candidates, you vouch for the individual that is most closely inclined to you. Now, when you're answering these questions yourselves, Sh.Musleh hit the nail on the head when he said you have to be educated yourself. So we need to know where our faith stands on these issues. And then the second thing you need to learn to do very well is how to articulate yourself. Because a lot of the times we may have the knowledge, but you don't know how to express that knowledge properly. So someone asks us a question, all of a sudden we get flustered, we get defensive, and we say things that even though we may not truly believe, but just come out the wrong way. So those are the two biggest things when answering these sorts of questions. Now, in terms of building and establishing that common ground, as Muslims, our morality and our ethics have been defined for us. Our faith defines our morality and our ethics. And what was haram back in the day is still haram now. And that's what we need to understand. So what type of common ground can we establish with other minorities? That common ground that we can establish is one of anti-discrimination. As human beings, we have the right to live a discrimination-free life. And that is for anyone and everyone, regardless of age, gender, orientation, anything like that. We are anti-discrimination. And our faith believes in that people should have public access regardless of what they believe and who they are. So that has to be the common ground. But if you want me to change my religion based upon your understanding of morality and ethics, then that is something that I can't do. That is where I draw the line. And that is why I keep bringing this back, that true inclusion and pluralism is not talking about our commonalities. True inclusion and pluralism is understanding each other's differences and accepting it for what it is. And just because a person may identify as homosexual, I will still defend their human rights, because that is what my faith teaches me to do. But if you want me to start doing nikah for homosexual individuals, then I would say that is a religious subject for me that my religion has given a guideline on, right? So that's how I would sort of approach that issue. Be educated, articulate well, and then always present the common ground, but never ever compromise who you are.
There is one more thing that I'd like to also add, and this is based on my own experience as well. Don't be afraid to say you don't know, and that you could refer, or they could go and speak to experts in this area or somebody that's more fluent on that subject. Simply, if you know the answer, but like Sheikh said, you just don't know how to articulate what it is that you want to say. Don't be afraid to just say, look, I can refer you to so-and-so. Give some outlet somewhere where the answers can be retrieved in a way that is acceptable and wouldn't cause any further discomfort or hardship on you, on your community and families and so on, or even on the religion as a whole. So keep that in mind as well. And again, this is something we always see in our Islamic history. Don't be afraid to say that you simply don't know, or I can't answer that question. Go and ask so-and-so. The last thing that I want to say is this is also going to now put you in a situation that again, if you delve into the political world, you really have to be familiar with resources and organizations that are out there that do exist to support us to be able to answer these questions. So you have to be familiar with them as well. So don't try to take on these questions all by yourself and say, you know, I'm going to be the representative that is going to handle all of these issues, and that's it. Don't take on all of these issues yourself. Just realize that there are support out there for you that you can also utilize, inshallah.
Perfect. So, Jazakallah khair. Would you like to ask your question?
So this is here. One of the things that I learned about this government when it was elected is that the Canadian Muslim Vote Organization released an article where they showed the percentage difference between how many Muslims voted through this election as opposed to the previous government. And I think the difference was like 70%. Like the amount of Muslims that actually took part and registered and voted could have possibly been the turning point why this government was elected and the other wasn't. Or it was a major contribution towards that. So to simply say that most Muslims don't vote, I don't personally know how accurate that is. But what we do have one thing in common, all of us, whether we're voting or not, is we're all subject to the same problems, to the same form of discrimination, to the same hardships in this whole political world. So even if we are, as a majority, not voting, this is something that we seriously have to study and turn to. And considering all the things that we've mentioned in terms of the preserving your deen and your morals and ethics and all of those things. Voting is a part of our deen now at this point. If it isn't, it has to be included in all the books that you read about the deen. This is a chapter and a subject that all of us have to be familiar with in order for us to be able to achieve what it is that we want to achieve in the next 100 years or 50 years, at least for our children and grandchildren, so that they could have that security of protecting their life, protecting their deen, protecting the choices that they make, protecting your hijab, protecting your identity, all of these things. Voting is a major element to that. Okay, and I'll hand it over to Sheikh as well.
So one of the things I'll address over here as well is that why do people in general not vote? It's not just the Muslim community. If you look at average turnouts for any country that has democratic elections, on average, it's between 40 to 60%, which means that there's a large chunk of society that is not voting, and that's not exclusive to the Muslim community. Why does that actually happen? Now, if we were to focus from the Muslim immigrant narrative, we don't have democratic processes in our countries. So when immigrants come to this country, they have no idea what the democratic process is and how significant voting is. Number two is that people have lost faith in their government. And what that means is that people don't feel the need to vote for a government because they feel that regardless of what happens, the same thing is going to keep repeating itself over and over again. And then number three is that people don't actually feel like their votes count, that their vote is worth anything. Like if each individual in this room feels like, hey, I'm just one vote, what difference is one vote going to make? But the issue is when we're all together, we're no longer a vote. We're hundreds and thousands and millions of votes. So these sort of things do require education. And like I said, the Canadian Muslim voting process is getting better. Like for the past 2 or 3 years, there's this concept of strategically voting, which is going to get better. More education is taking place. We're going to see the value of our votes, and more people will start voting. But I would also, again, reemphasize is that we are responsible for our own selves, but our governments also need to take responsibility. They need to, one, show care and concern for the people that are voting by standing up for the things they said they would vote, that stand up for before elections. And number two is make sure that people understand that their votes count. That you'll notice that these politicians, they love coming to our masajid before the elections. But what happens once they're in power? How often do they come to the masajid then? How often do they arrange, events for the Muslim community? They don't. So part of that political engagement has to be post-election as well. So there has to be ownership on both sides of the fence. Allahu Alam.
Jazakallah khair. All right, so yes.
Go ahead.
I totally sympathize with you. But however, this goes back to a lot of the things that we're saying now. So this goes back to all of us as community supporting one another. Sometimes we just have one or two people that are out there in the media. Although that is growing, alhamdulillah, you will see more Muslims, especially active on social media, starting their own talk shows on social media. I mean, it's a platform and it's a starting point. Maybe we're not on NBC or we're not on full-fledged TV channels, but at least there is a starting point, a platform that all of us could work at. The fact is, for me, when I look at this from a bird's eye view, not every Muslim has really truly understood. When I say every Muslim, in general, Muslims just really haven't understood how important this is. We're still in that mentality and slowly peeling ourselves out of it where somebody else is going to do it. Somebody else more qualified is going to get up there. I hope somebody is going to go and speak up and represent us. It's always the other, the other, the other. Coming to your question about the media, again, this is again with my own experience, with people that you'll meet and organizations you get involved with, this is changing, alhamdulillah. It is changing. It's taking some time, but media training is very much available. More du'at, more speakers are taking media training, including myself, including Sheikh as well. We're trying our best to get out there. However, there are so many challenges with this. You're talking about, do you remember in the beginning of the school year when the liberals, they released the educational curriculum, right? And there was all this controversy about some of the content that was in there that some of our kids would be learning, et cetera, et cetera. What was happening in almost all the schools in Toronto? There were protests happening. Do you remember, did you watch the TV and watch the news channels and look at the faces that they were showing 9 out of 10 times, holding the signs, yeah, I want to say no to the curriculum, and they had these people as if they were going to break down walls. A bunch of hijabis and a bunch of hijabis and a bunch of Muslims. I was even showing my wife, I was like, let's just wait and see if the audience is going to shift. Maybe they'll put somebody else on the camera. And it just kept focusing. And then you'd go up to like this auntie who could speak like 4 words of English. I want to know the education haram. You know, like those are the things that are being broadcasted on live TV. So what I'm saying is that it brings up another challenge now, because even when you get into the media, you don't have any control of what's going to be now screened in front of the world. And that runs into another problem. So it works both ways. We are putting forth as much effort as we can to make ourselves educated, to be out there in the media world, and to be as eloquent as we can be. And I totally agree with you. From everything, from standing on political stages, public stages, to khutbahs, to classes. So many speakers, they know their stuff, they just don't know how to say it properly. They don't know how to say it eloquently. They just keep rambling over and over about the same thing. And some people get the best sleep of their life when they're trying to listen to them. This stuff is changing, alhamdulillah. It is a process, it is taking some time, and that's why these conversations, these discussions are extremely important. The more we continue to talk about this, the quicker this stuff starts to change, the more people like yourselves will walk out of this room and you'll start thinking about, you know what, maybe I should take some media training. You know what, maybe I should take some course, at a local university on politics or something along those lines, and I want to get involved. Maybe I'll start my own channel and talk about these issues and build an audience from there, and so the cycle begins. So this is what we're here for at the end of the day, is to address some of these areas, inshallah. May Allah make it easy for us. It is happening, but we just want more of you, inshallah, all of us, to take part in that, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. May Allah strengthen us. Allahumma ameen.
So I'm just going to address the media issue. So I'm actually reading an article right now. This is on CBC. It says, Black Muslims in Ottawa upset over lack of diversity at Muslim conference, written by Idil Musa from CBC News. So now it's attacking the conference. It's saying that there's not enough black representation, and I agree with this 110%. Our community is very diverse and needs representation of all ethnicities, all backgrounds, and all ideologies and points of view. But the reason why I highlight this is that clearly we're seeing a shift where not only do we have a sister writing the article, not only do we have, actually my screen turned off, sorry about that. We have a sister who's doing the speaking on behalf of the Muslim community, but we're addressing a Muslim community issue in mainstream media, which we may not realize the value of that, but that is huge. Like having a sister from our community speak about our community in mainstream media, this is something huge, fighting for rights that our religion stands for. So I would say there's a paradigm shift taking place. It's just very, very slow. Number two is that this whole concept of showing that Muslims have fun. I think that something like that was done in Little Mosque on the Prairie. I'm not sure if you've heard of the show. I mean, it wasn't hilarious, it wasn't extremely funny, but it was an attempt at, Muslim satire and Muslim parody. And it was a great attempt. And I think as time goes on, we're going to see more of it. But we need to understand that we're still relatively new to the whole Western experience. For the longest time, Muslims have been told, as Muslims, you shouldn't laugh. As Muslims, you shouldn't partake in arts. As Muslims, certain things are haram for you. And not because our religion says that they're haram, but because that was someone else's opinion. So the more we educate ourselves, the more we learn, the more you will see Muslims integrating to the mainstream, inshallah. Wallahu a'lam.
So we don't have a lot of time, unfortunately, so I'm going to just ask this one question that I have here on the sticky note, and then we'll just wrap it up, inshallah.
But I also want to hear these. Why don't we say these are the last three questions, and then we can wrap up. So this brother here, that sister over there, and then this question. And I'll answer we'll answer these questions in 5 minutes or less, inshallah.
Okay.
Is that okay with us? 5 minutes, we'll be
5
done.
minutes? Okay,
Yeah.
inshallah.
Inshallah. So let's start with this brother first, because you haven't asked. Yeah. Yes.
But what about the other side of it? For example, maybe more relevant now, themselves, where the media is heavily used to perpetuate political narrative.
Of course.
And what can you do? Does it just come down to a question of, like you said, funding earlier, that we don't have, up until that point, that we don't have our own media platform, there's nothing we can do?
Right.
Or is there something we can do to control the other side of the equation, not just participating in the media, but actively using it
Of course.
to further affect you?
Right. I would mention right off the bat that more important than the usage of media is human interaction. Studies show that more non-Muslims interact with Muslims, the more favorable opinions they will have of Muslims, regardless of what's put on the news or in the media. If you look down south, you have shows like Trevor Noah, Stephen Colbert. Any leftist show is very pro-Muslim these days. But the divide between the right and the left is just getting bigger and bigger. So at the end of the day, more important than the media is that human interaction. And number two, I still think we need our own community members to step up to the plate. Like, it's great to have, non-Muslims stand up for you. If you feel good about it, you embrace it. But I think that's part of the colonialist mindset, where a white person can do a job better than a brown person or a black person. We need to get rid of that. We're beautiful with any color that we are, and embrace who we are and speak for ourselves. So part of it is still creating our own media platforms. And as Sh.Musleh mentioned, the things that we're doing on YouTube right now, the things that we're doing on social media, is a step in the right direction, inshallah. Jazakallah khair, thank you so much. And what's the sticky note question?
So we have this one last question. What is the ruling of women joining the political field, as in MP, maybe even Prime Minister? What is possible in Islam?
How many people watch The Daily Show with Trevor Noah? So you guys should be very happy that Ilhan Omar was on it like 2 nights ago, right? And she represented the Muslim community. She comes straight out of Minnesota, has an amazing story. So I think, look, at the end of the day, Muslims need to understand that our religion is a religion of facilitation, but there are boundaries at the same time. So anything that is being made haram is clear. Anything that is left over is within the realm of halal. So anything that is a man is allowed to do in our faith, a woman is allowed to do, with the exception of very, very few things. Very, very few things is a woman not allowed to do that a man is allowed to do. So now, in those sort of situations, political leadership is not one of those issues, right? If a woman wants to run for mayor or for MP or any other form of leadership, she's allowed to do that. The difference from within, Orthodox traditional scholarship is how far can she go in establishing, a congregation, meaning leading salah or giving Jummah khutbah. And there's pretty much unanimous consensus on that that's not allowed. But there's divine wisdom behind that as well, because there's certain times that women don't pray. So these sort of things have to be understood in their context. But this whole narrative of women aren't allowed doing this and aren't allowed doing that, people need to know their roles, know their positions, and leave that up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides what is halal and haram, not men and women. If Allah has made it halal, no man can make it haram. And if Allah has made it haram, no woman can make it halal. And that's the way we need to view this topic. Allahu alam.
Yeah, I have one sentence I want to add to that. For the sisters in particular, may Allah Azza wa Jal make you leaders. Insha'Allah. Make you leaders, continue to educate all of you, and hopefully, insha'Allah ta'ala, we see some of you in this room, insha'Allah, somewhere on the political stage representing Muslims all throughout the world. May Allah strengthen you. Allahumma ameen.
Okay, perfect. Jazakallah khair, Sh.Musleh Khan and Sh.Navaid Aziz, for this wonderful workshop. I hope it gave a lot of insight with a lot of the political actions that are going on today, and that'll be the end of our workshop, inshallah. So, Jazakallah khair for coming.